Welcome to Bake This Book. My name's Erik Fabian. I'm a home baker and co-founder of Sour House. Today, we're going to be talking with cookbook authors, folks who focus on naturally fermented sourdough breads and pastries. We're going to talk about their books, how they were made, the recipes inside, and tips for making your next bake a really great bake. Here we go. Hi, everyone. I am excited to be joined today by Amy Coyne, who you may know for her very popular blog and social media presence, Amy Bakes Bread. Amy has a new book coming out, The Beginner's Guide to Sourdough, Best Kept Secrets for Successful Bread Every Time, published by Page Street Publishing. It's going to have 50 go-to recipes. I'm really excited to talk with Amy. She's a full-time mom. She's been doing that for a long time. She has that background as an educator of young children, and she's really built out one of the most interesting, kind of fast-growing educational brands and kind of like places, little corners of the sourdough baking internet. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Erik. I'm so excited to be here today.
I think we have a lot to talk about. And before we get into the book, I want to set the stage and imagine with me for a minute, somebody has just put in their headphones and turned on this podcast in their kitchen, and they're pulling out some flour and their bowls and their scale, and they're about to bake. And you're there in the kitchen with them, shoulder to shoulder. What would be one tip that you would give this baker to have a really great bake today?
I wish I could be in the kitchen with everybody. That's my favorite spot to listen to a podcast or, to put in my headphones. And I think that my biggest tip is take a breath and think what is my environment like today? A lot of times we don't realize, and this is probably specifically with sourdough, but it can go for any baking. We don't realize the effect that our environment or temperature or the humidity in the air, things like that can actually have and the impact that it can have on our bake. So that's what I would say is take a minute. What does the weather feel like? Do I have tons of air conditioning blasting, or, is my house older and I've got warmth coming through the windows or something like that?
Totally. That's great. I think, in our work, temperature is one of the big things that we point people to. I think it's the most under-recognized and undervalued ingredient in baking. And particularly when we're talking about sourdough starters and the microbes that we're cultivating, they just like the spa life. They like to be warmer than us in general. There's useful cooler temperatures for different things, but we like to be maybe home 68, 70 degrees. And typically I recommend people warm up their starter to 75, 82. And it's kind of an act of empathy to learn your starter to recognize that if I'm comfortable, that doesn't mean that my little community of microbes are happy. Are you cultivating empathy or awareness or something through your baking? And do you feel like that's a byproduct of it?
It may be a little bit. I don't feel like I take a lot of time doing this. I mean, I have 4 kids, so I feel like when I get a minute to stretch and fold my dough, I can breathe for a second. But
Totally.
but I do think that it really does help me kind of connect into what I'm baking. And I feel like it helps me to plan out my day or my bake a little bit better. So that way, I do recommend those similar temperatures as well, in my especially 100% naturally fermented recipes. But I also recognize that, that's not going to be everybody's house. That's not going to be what every situation is. And so even if it's just to recognize, oh, this is going to maybe take me longer today than I thought, or, oh, this is going to be sped up, that just helps me, because then I'm not looking at my dough wondering, where did I go wrong?
Totally. I love that. And I think being generous with yourself as well as your bread is a good practice for us all. And so you've been educating, and I think you have millions of people come into your blog now, and you have hundreds of thousands of people that follow you on Instagram. And so you've had, I think, a lot of opportunity to work with people and answer questions. And
Yes.
How has that led to the book, both in terms of knowing what people need to know, but also in how to communicate it?
Yeah. Well, so I maybe if I look back over my last well, probably 16 years. I mean, if I go that far back, when I kind of became a mom and wanted to just make food for my family, like more from scratch, that's kind of where a lot of this started. And then as I did that over time, I learned things, and I got into sourdough baking about 12 years ago, made my own starter, all of that kind of stuff, and it led me to having a lot of fails and having, like just learning how it works. I also had a background in teaching. So I was, that's what my degree is in elementary education. So I felt like I could really connect with people who are trying to learn this, and I could kind of put it in a way that they could understand. And I think I felt like at the time that there were kind of these camps of people who was like, just do whatever you want. Just throw your sourdough starter into a bowl with flour and water, and it'll turn out great. And then you have people who are really nailed into the science, but you kind of have this group of people who are like, okay, I don't know which way to go, or I don't know, like, how does that apply to me? And I don't necessarily have time for all the science right now, but my stuff isn't turning out when I just throw it in the bowl. So I am kind of a big proponent of just like understanding that little simple parts of sourdough science and then being able to adapt it to yourself. And so that really was kind of the beginning of me thinking about sharing sourdough information, was wanting people to like just understand that little. And sometimes I feel like as a mom who's choosing to stay home, I don't have a science degree, so I'm thinking I don't need to know about science. But if you really want like that best bake, just understanding that little bit is going to help you so much. So I've had the opportunity to answer so many questions from people, and it could be almost a different answer, right? Depending on your environment, depending on so many factors. And so I took kind of all of that and wanted to just put it into a book, but also put recipes in there that were going to be easy for families to bake with. And that was really my goal, was to try to make it approachable, to make it accessible to families, to be able to, sourdough is, it doesn't cost a lot to invest into it, but it's time, right?
Yeah.
And so my book, I feel like, really is, how can you make sourdough work for you? How can you make it fit into your life? Let me teach you, a little bit of that simple science, but then give you recipes that are going to turn out for you and that you can modify to work for you.
Yeah, and your book has all kinds of recipes. You kind of organize it, I think, interestingly, as a series of loaves, like
Yeah.
your first loaf through your fifth loaf. And with each loaf, you introduce some new elements. The most basic kind of like 75%-ish kind of hydration loaf with the straight in the mix is your first loaf. The second one I feel is like the big turning point in your book, where it's like you're introducing levains,
Yes.
autolyse, fermentolase type ideas, higher hydration. You're talking about shaping and steam and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't take long to get your black belt in sourdough, right? You just need to bake a few of those and get
Yes.
those few things kind of out of the way. If you can get over that hump, that's a
Mm-hmm.
big achievement. And you're baking better bread than what you get at the grocery store by far.
So much better.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you take it further. You cover sandwich loaves in the third loaf. You do kind of like shaped breads like pizzas and bagels and stuff with the fourth loaf. And then
Mm-hmm.
more like special occasion breads in that kind of fifth loaf that use maybe a milder stiff levain. Things like monkey bread and donuts and, things that you might want to do as a special like holiday bread or whatever
Yeah.
kind of thing. So there's a lot in here, I think, for somebody to kind of get started with and explore. I find new bakers, like you say, it's simple ingredients, it's not that hard per se of a craft to like go in with, but there's a kind of a mental barrier of like the timeline. I think
Yeah.
that is like probably the biggest thing. Like, how do I deal with this thing over maybe 2 days? So how do you get people past that hump?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, we live in a really fast-paced world. So
Uh-huh.
the thought of having to feed something and then have it be ready, in 4 hours from now or 12 or whatever, I get a lot of people that say, I'm going to start it, but they just feel this mental load or burden of it. And I would just say to that, like, just try it. Just
Hmm.
start. Like, once you get into it, you realize how it can actually fit in your life. And that's why I feel like the science part really is kind of so important, to just understand that a little bit, because you can tweak based on, right, the amount you feed your starter when it's going to be ready for you. So a lot of times I feed my starter at night, let it rise all night, and then in the morning it's ready to go. So I'm
Hmm.
never really, it takes me just a little bit of that effort, and then I can feed my family sourdough forever. Like we haven't bought bread at the store for 2-3 years because this has been what we've been eating. And it's just become kind of our way of life.
Yeah. Fitting into your schedule. It's funny how the time management of it becomes the biggest challenge. Once you have a starter going, figuring out when bulk is done, which kind of takes some learning experience, and then fitting into your life, especially if you have a busy life, like those are key.
And I will say too that the feedback that I get so much on my recipes is people love the timelines. So like in my recipes on my website and all of the recipes in this book do have sample timelines based on the temperature of your dough. So that's the part that's the part I feel like people miss
Yeah,
sometimes, right? Is
totally.
like they give you a timeline and then they're like, oh, that mine didn't fit in that timeline. Well, what was your dough temperature,
Yeah.
And what was the dough temperature of the person that created that recipe? So I think that that's kind of where you need to look at that and say like, okay, that's the key,
Yeah.
really,
Temperature.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Comes
yeah.
back. Temperature sets the ground, which everything happens within, right? I totally agree. My kids generally enjoy baking with me. They definitely enjoy eating breads, and kids love sourdough. Like their little bodies recognize the nutrition or whatever in there, and like just want to eat it up. But I wonder, as a stay-at-home mom with a big family, I think you have like 4 kids, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Do the kids bake with you? Like, how the kids kind of relate to what you're doing?
The funny thing is, I feel like the kids have kind of been a central part of this
Hmm.
entire journey. Um, back, it was about 12 years ago, maybe 13. So I have a 16-year-old, 14-year-old twin boys, and then a 9-year-old boy. So when the 16-year-old and those 14-year-olds were little, that was where I needed a little bit of an escape.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
that led me to sourdough, right? I remember laying on the floor of my twins' bedroom. They were probably 1.5, like just willing them to go to sleep and just researching sourdough because it was like, well, this is interesting to me. It's something that I'm not doing day in and day out. um, it's a hard time and you need an outlet to like,
Yeah.
that's not just, changing diapers and mom, I
Yeah.
need this, all day long. And so this really gave me, that outlet. And so from there, they always baked with me. They've always done, they actually about, I don't know, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, they started their own cookie business. So we actually do have a cottage bakery license and they
Wow.
have a cookie business. It's not sourdough, but it was one of those things that I kind of, put a couple years on hold with sharing about sourdough information because I wanted to really like invest into them learning how to be an entrepreneur and like having
Hmm.
this business. So they've loved to bake. My son comes in the kitchen and bakes bread frequently, different things, and they always come home and are like, "What'd you bake today, mom?" Like they're
Yeah.
they're so excited or like, "Oh, we need bread. I better go make some." Like it's not that's just the kind of the culture of our home as it's progressed.
Yeah. Well, they must be very inspired by the kind of empire that you've been building, and I think any parent on the listening to this can appreciate those moments when you're hiding in your child's room, hoping that they will go to sleep. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
so you've been teaching people, learning what people need to learn to get going. You've been baking for a long time. How did the book actually come into existence?
Yeah. So I decided, I think it was 2023, I decided like I'm actually going to start teaching sourdough classes in person and I'm going to start publishing information on my website. So it's kind of those two things. I'm like, okay, my kids are now in school full time. I can focus on these things. And so I started doing that. I started teaching the classes and here's the thing, the more that you teach, right, the more questions you get, the more questions that you learn the answers to and you try to figure it out. And so it was probably a year of that. And around the same time, I had those two friends reach out to me wanting to do a sourdough collaborative cookbook. And I agreed to do that because more so that I just needed friends in this industry. Initially. And I thought it was going to be a great book also, it's both of those things. And then a couple weeks later, I was contacted by my editor, Sadie, and said, hey, would you be at all interested in creating a cookbook? We feel that there could be a need in this community for like a beginner sourdough cookbook.
Hmm.
And so from there, I mulled around some different ideas. They did tell me in that initial meeting, they said, like, we want you to write the book that you are meant to write. And like, I really feel like that is this book.
Yeah. And when you thought about making a book, what cookbooks have inspired you? And like, where did you look to for not inspiration just for your bread, but like how you wanted to organize the book?
Yeah. So I honestly have loved like a lot of food bloggers,
Uh-huh.
just as like learning to cook in my own kitchen and things like that. One who I really loved was Melanie Gunnell, and she's Mel's Kitchen Cafe. And she actually self published a cookbook. And I loved her cookbook, and I loved the like lifestyle pictures kind of throughout it, but also like just really great recipes. So I knew that I wanted to like add an element of me and my family into the book. And
Hmm.
then I'd also like, I loved, I think we've all seen Maurizio's Perfect Loaf book. And, I loved his step by step pictures, the QR codes, like the things like that throughout. It was just an incredible work that
Hmm.
he produced. So many of those kinds of things that I looked at, I'm like, what do I love about a cookbook and what can I add to my book to kind of pull those things together? And then as far as the organization of it, I really wanted it to be approachable. So I wanted it to be like wherever you are in your sourdough journey, you could come in and make a really great recipe, but I also wanted people to be able to pick it off of a shelf and learn how to, feel like I could make something and have it turn out well in one of their first bakes.
Yeah, and I think there's a range of images from like, your simpler, tighter crumb type loaves to something that looks more like your classic artesian, like open crumb kind of things in
Yes.
there. And like, I think it makes it feel inviting as well as aspirational.
Yeah.
I feel like the home baker is an interesting, I don't want to say like underappreciated, but like they develop an expertise that's different than the professional baker. And
Yeah.
do you feel like speaking as a home baker to a beginner baker that you felt like you had a different kind of insight or way of bringing information that was helpful?
I think so. And I really think because I look at myself like I'm a self-taught home baker. This book is my experiences
Hmm.
in this book and how I do things so that I can feed my family basically.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of what we're all going for. And a lot of the people that I interact with and that I talk with, like they want to be able to bring like a really, first of all, they want to feed their family, but they also want to show up at the party with like something that people are like, oh, that
Yeah.
tasted really good.
Yeah.
Like, where'd you get that recipe from?
Totally.
That kind of a thing. And so I kind of get both sides of it. And I think being a home baker, I feel like people will tell me, like, you're really relatable because I feel like I could see me making that because I watched you make it, or
Yeah.
something like that. And I think that these recipes in this book are things that could come out of any mom's kitchen or any,
Hmm.
dad's kitchen that wants to bake on a Saturday morning or, something like that. And that's
Yeah.
what I really was kind of going for in this book because there are so many incredible sourdough books out there, really incredible ones. And a lot of them skew toward the artisan side, I think.
Hmm.
And that's because it's a great way to make like rustic, beautiful loaves that are hard
Yeah.
to get. But also, I love the idea that you can use sourdough in anything. And that provides, such good benefits. Part of this for me is actually one of my sons has type 1 diabetes. And so
Hmm.
we've just seen how his blood sugars do so much better using these long fermented recipes. And that has been like a huge driver for me to, make anything sourdough.
Yeah, it's like, and it's such a great, I think, gateway drug into just knowing where your food comes from and eating healthier, and it opens up the whole world of fermented foods. And like,
Yes.
it's great in a lot of ways. The holidays are coming up. So, if there's somebody tuning in who's just like, I want to show up at the holiday party and get a round of applause, where are you pointing them in this
Oh my
cookbook?
goodness. Probably like the special bread section for sure.
Uh-huh.
Like every Thanksgiving I make cinnamon rolls. We have a big extended family, reunion get together and we do like a brunch we spend the whole week eating and celebrating basically.
Yeah.
But we have like a brunch on usually Tuesday or Wednesday before Thanksgiving and I make cinnamon rolls and these are so good. And I also have a raspberry roll in here that is one of
Oh,
my
yeah.
favorites of all
That looks
time.
awesome. Yeah.
And then like we do like the monkey bread on like Christmas morning or like all of those kinds of things. Like it's just perfect for some of
Yeah.
those holidays.
So, okay, let me ask you, holiday baking. I find in the midst of the big feast, especially if you have multiple people, multiple cooks in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a logistical nightmare and it's like busy. And the baking, it's like a whole different timing sequence, like because you know the oven you need for like maybe a
Hmm.
turkey or whatever. I find that I actually bake less. I often will try to put like something into the meal. I want to carve out little space for something, but I bake less ambitiously perhaps for the big meal than I do maybe around the edges. And I find
Hmm.
my baking kind of fills in, like you're saying, the morning after or the during the run up to feed people while they're cooking or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you find your baking fits into the big holiday meal?
Yeah. I see kind of see what you're doing too, because I do a lot of like I'm cooking the sides and I'm making like all the
Yeah.
vegetables and the other things. The thing that I try to do specifically, like if I'm thinking Thanksgiving, like I will use my fridge. So I'll let my rolls rise and then I'll just pop them in the fridge. And then when there's a free minute in the oven, I'll pull them out and bake them. So I feel like it's just kind of Tetrising like
Yeah.
where to fit things when. But I do try to like do just more fun holiday type breakfasts or add in something for like we'll do like gingerbread waffles during December
Uh-huh.
or something fun. I just feel like that time of year like we're craving cozy and delicious, and it doesn't always have to be for that holiday meal, but
Yeah.
it definitely like plays a part in somewhere in the day. I feel
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a good point. You know, use the fridge, use the timeline to kind of make it. I've been making a chart like for everybody the last couple of years to kind of keep everybody organized, and it helps, but everybody also ignores the chart. And and I feel like it's also cool. I'm always fascinated by sourdough. You know, you think of it as it is bread. It is what bread started with. You know, there's nutritional benefits of fermented breads, and you know now there's this whole history of like the way industrial bread. It's kind of changed it, and to some degree we're coming back. But there's now people's traditions are often not fermented breads, whether it's a quick bread like a cornbread or something, or a roll. But I think one thing that's fun as an experiment around the holidays is exploring ways that you can sneak in a little sourdough into your traditional
Yeah.
bread, or even using discard as a roux in a soup or
Mhm.
something or other things. And you do touch on all kinds of like, you have scones in here, you have other kinds of things. What's your favorite sneaky use for like discard at this point?
Oh, man. Okay, it's really good in pie crust.
Uh-huh.
I love it for that because also you can use it chilled from the fridge, so it just makes the flakiest pie crust because you already want it
Ah,
to be cold, right? And so
yeah.
this just it just makes it better. And then I actually have a recipe for sourdough biscuits and the sourdough gravy using the
Ah,
discard in the gravy, and that's probably like one of my favorite, like
yeah.
just delicious like breakfast when you want something to like impress people. That's a really good one.
Another little gem.
Another,
Oh,
yeah.
people are gonna be so
Yes.
excited. Um, so
It's a really good one. But I think it's important too to remember, we go visit family and not all of them bake sourdough. They
mhm.
just want me to make like a really good artisan loaf and they like devour it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so I think that it doesn't always have to be like the best, the most intricate bake during the holidays. It could just be even something simple because you're sharing it with people that you love who maybe don't get to eat like that all the time.
It's a good point. It's like everyone is sort of like I feel like our community are people who, start off because they're curious and they learn and they want the challenge or whatever, but they've quickly become their little community baker. And like I imagine a world where like everyone at least knows how to bake. I feel like it's a basic human skill at this point that we should embrace, but not everybody's going to geek out on it. And I think that there's some people who is like you're going to show up at the party and you're going to be the one bringing the bread and people are really going to appreciate it. And it's a really great way to like build community and to kind of create new relationships. And I think it's also a good idea to bring a little starter with you because like there's always
Yeah.
somebody at the party who's just like, oh, I've wanted to do this, but
Mhm.
the barriers they don't have any
Yeah.
starter.
I love that idea. Even like I have a lot of people who say they'll gift like dehydrated starter to people during the
Hmm.
holidays or things like that. And I just think it's a great way to share your love and passion for for good food and good bread. Um, to touch on too, one other thing that you had said that reminded me of this is that, not everyone maybe is going to be that baker, but it's been interesting because there's been a huge pop-up of like a lot of, maybe more community bakers. And you see that, I think, in a lot of home bakers, people who start to get this down and they're like, oh, I want to, maybe sell some loaves or, start up like a little farm stand or, do things like that. And they've kind of become this, I've loved seeing people getting more into these breads, sourdough breads specifically, through other community bakers, like building community. And I have a lot of those bakers who do use a lot of my recipes, which I think is awesome. And I think that and then they make them their own too, which I think, is great. But I love that people are sharing their skills, their talents to help other families too.
Yeah. You mentioned you don't buy bread so much anymore. Is there particular types of breads that, you used to kind of like feel attached to that like suddenly you could make and like you were like, aha, I'm free. I can live anywhere.
Yeah. So I feel like that was a little bit of a catalyst for me getting into sourdough.
Yeah.
Because I had grown up, actually, my family had lived abroad. We lived in Germany and the Czech Republic when I was young. And I grew up eating like really good European bread. And then we came back to the US and we actually lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I did like love sourdough, the tang, all of that when we'd go into the city or even at the grocery store, you could get some. So I felt like I kind of grew up around pretty good bread. But when I moved away from those places, I felt like I couldn't find it anymore. And that's what led me to wanting to start making my own bread, partially. But I still couldn't get like that crispy, crusty loaf. And that's what kind of led me to sourdough. And so I really do think like I can make anything better than what I can get locally. There's maybe a few, if I go into town, there may be one or two bakeries that I could probably get something similar. But when you learn how to bake, when you learn how to cook, you don't necessarily like, yeah, it's nice to go out every once in a while, but like you don't have to. I feel like we're more picky about where we go out to eat.
Yeah. My wife says I've ruined bread for her. And like, I think pizza is particularly like, people just don't realize how bland pizza dough is until you start making sourdough pizza. But it's also, I think it helps people appreciate the really refined craft of good bakeries. And like,
Yes.
and that's something I say when I talk to like farmers and millers and stuff. It's like in our business, we're selling tools to the home baker. And, but like a lot of those people suddenly just start to appreciate the time and effort and skill it takes to shape a nice loaf. And when they want to try something, they're maybe ready to pay more for that nice loaf. And then they're just like, and they're buying more grains and like, kind of just like starting to participate in like the local grain economies and stuff. So it's all like everybody's education is super beneficial for everyone. Okay. So I have I don't know if I want to say it's a bone to pick, but like I'm curious. So I am a big believer in the badly named baker's math. I think anything that has the word math in it is intimidating. And I'm not like super great at math, but like I find weighing your ingredients and thinking about, recipes as formulas, as ratios, it is another thing that's so empowering because you can just like make up recipes and scale recipes like on the fly in your head. And if you're like me, who's like a little loosey-goosey with the numbers, it all kind of works out. And you put this in the appendix of your book, and you avoided introducing this earlier on, as that's obviously to me very intentional. So, what was your decision process around putting that in the appendix?
Exactly what you said. It can be intimidating to people. And so I think that, this is really geared toward a beginner. And I do talk more upfront in the book about why I do like to use weight instead of volume measurements, which I think especially if you're an American beginner baker coming into this, you are used to scooping a cup of flour with your, the cups that you've been using or that your mom used or whatever. And I get a lot of people who are just like, can you please put the recipe in cups,
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for me to like explain to somebody, like I feel like I'm already asking them like, do all the science with me, now change the whole way that you've been, baking and all of that. And so I really think that, if I'm talking to a lot of the moms that I talk to are like, I didn't like math or I didn't, That's not all of them. Some really did love math. I loved math, but but I think that it can just feel intimidating and overwhelming already.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the reason. So I did talk earlier on about why I do think it's important to use a scale. Why I do think weight is important for your recipes. But then if people really want to get it more into it, they can go into the baker's math and all of those details. I do, though, want to emphasize that I do think it is really important to use a scale. I had a group of girls over at my house a couple months ago, and I was actually teaching them how to make some sourdough bread. And I was just showing them, I'm like, okay, you scoop a cup of flour, let's weigh it. You scoop a cup, you scoop a cup. And everybody's cups were different. Nobody is going to sit there. Most home bakers that I know don't have the time or aren't going to make the time to sit there and fluff their flour and spoon and level it into a cup. And there's really no standard measurement for, what a cup of flour should weigh. It varies based on who's developing the recipe.
And the environment, so, the humidity of your day.
Exactly. And I've had so many people too say like, oh, I started using a scale. It's so much easier. You don't have to dirty measuring cups. You don't have to wash them. But my goal is to get people to use the scale first. Then they can go figure out the baker's math at the end if they want to.
All right. That's fair. I can accept that.
Yeah.
One other thing you do as a teaching tool is you include QR codes in your recipes. And these go to videos. Are they mostly videos that are already existing, or did you shoot for the
I shot the videos for the cookbook. Yeah.
Okay. So a whole bunch of fresh content and to really kind of visually share. And I think this is sort of like the world we live in now, like where a cookbook is a cookbook plus, but there's visual thing, it's like YouTube and it was really helpful when I was learning to bake, just understanding what a stretch and fold is and what does the dough look like at different steps, it's like, how do you know your starter is ready to use? Like those things, visual cues really help. Was that always something that you wanted to include?
It was. I really wanted it to be, because I find those helpful. If I'm in a cookbook and I wanted it to be where, okay, I'm making this recipe, well, I want to know what that looks like, and they can just see a video of it. And then that can also lead them to potentially more information as well. If they really are need more information, there's other YouTube videos or there's other things, that they could kind of go down that rabbit hole if they wanted to, but to kind of learn about it, because I want to make this the easiest for somebody if they were just picking up the book that they could have their recipe turn out.
Totally. Do you feel like your baking has changed since writing this book?
I think I'm always changing, honestly. I mean, I don't feel like I know everything about sourdough. I feel like I'm always learning. I'm constantly, right now I'm doing a lot with whole wheats and ancient grains and things like that. I'm learning even more. So I think that it's always a process. I don't know how much my baking changed just because of the book, or if it's just kind of a natural progression of always learning as you're baking.
Yeah. So this is obviously geared towards the beginner baker, and a book that can take them a long way. It could be one of their kind of core reference books. What's the impact you hope to have on the sourdough baking community? Your community obviously is a large group. Obviously a lot of them come to you for resources already and learn a lot from you. What are you hoping to achieve with this?
So I would say that it is geared toward a beginner baker. We've talked a lot about that, but I think it's also geared toward an intermediate baker, because I think that, a lot of intermediate bakers, they've maybe been baking 6 months to a year. That's how they would identify themselves.
Yeah.
And there's still things that they're maybe don't understand about temperature. They're still learning, about this and this. And I really feel like that these are 50 quality recipes that you'd want in your family. You could make them with your kids. You could make them, anything like that. And so I really feel like it's geared to start out as a beginner, but also geared toward that intermediate baker with really a home baker. I mean, that's who I've really written this book for.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting. I feel like this can be a first person's book. It's the beginning of their baking cookbook collection. And
it's great if you wanted to gift it to somebody that's wanted to bake sourdough, something like that. If you already liked it and then you wanted to go on and gift it to people to really get started.
Being such an online person, you're on social media, you're creating stuff for your blog, you have a newsletter, you're very much using technology to teach, and yet you're bringing out a paper book. in this age. So do you think that, in an online AI world where we're all going to get replaced by like AI bot teachers, why write a book today? Like
Yeah.
why do you think that is important?
Honestly, I feel like that I've had so many people in my community asking me for a physical book. I think that
Hmm.
was my first like light bulb, like, okay, people want this.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like that. A lot of people really like to bake from a physical book. And so just having something tangible, I think is very nice. It's also like my mom, I think, bought 50 copies so she can gift them to people.
Right.
I mean, it
Yeah.
does. It makes a good like gift.
And what a great
To-
mom.
yes. I think I don't know if anybody will be baking sourdough that she's going to give them to, but
By golly, they're going to.
right, they will know how to start.
Yeah, totally.
But I do think kind of in this AI world, like people want to feel anchored to people. Like they want
Uh-huh.
connection, they want people. And I really feel like I did try throughout this book to add my own voice to it, to add like a little bit about my family, a little bit about my experience. And like I would love it if I could invite everyone over into my kitchen and we could bake together. Like that would be so much fun for me. Like
Mhm.
I love interacting with people. I love helping people try to troubleshoot and like make it work for them because I know the feeling when it doesn't work out and it's not great. Like
Yeah.
you want people, and I honestly, like I remember I still do this when I pull the lid off of my loaf and it's risen. You're like, like it's one of those things that just never goes away, I think. Like that
Yeah,
feeling that
totally.
you created that. And I want that for people. And I think that like a physical book, I don't know, I think it helps people to see like, okay, this is maybe a real person and
Mhm.
somebody who is, putting this out there to help me be successful.
Totally. One thing I really appreciate about the sourdough community is how generous it is. And it's like one of the more open and nicer places of the internet still. And my theory is that because it is such a practice of abundance, you end up with so much starter and you have more bread than you can eat. And like, so you all end up giving just inherently just to keep
Yeah.
doing the practice that it's kind of good for your soul in that way. But I hear the same sentiment that you're saying about just wanting to bake with people in their kitchen. I was just talking to Sarah Owens, another cookbook author, and she said the same thing. Like, it was just like, it's just like she would love to be in people's kitchen and baking alongside them. And I
Yeah.
think that spirit, no matter how long you've been baking and like, whether you've been a professional or not, like that sense of wanting to bring people in and kind of share and like do things together, get your hands dirty, handle like physical objects and kind of like find that as like a place of peace is a really powerful practice. When you watch people mature as a baker and they get over the hump and they start baking, where do you see them going with it? What are the paths of becoming a home baker?
I feel like you do have a few different paths. I feel like you have some people who they just learn how to fit it really well into their life. So it just becomes kind of their way of life too. They now know like how their starter works, how it's going to fit into their schedule. So I feel like that's kind of one big path as a home baker. Now somebody's making sourdough weekly for their family,
Hmm.
their bread. You have some who really love it and want to like mass produce it. And so you have people that, become cottage bakers or open up a place in their community that they're selling bread. I see that happening a lot.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. And then I think you have some that get really into like the science of it or how it all works, how fermentation works. And they want to get into like, making all of the panettone or like the things that are like these big projects that I
Yeah.
mean I want to learn too, but
Yeah.
but
When we have time, maybe when the kids are at school.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those kinds of things, and you get into these big projects and you're looking at every little step of the process. What could I do better next time? And like really getting into like the nitty gritty of every little piece of it.
Yeah. There's so many things to like geek out on once you can make a basic loaf. And I find people like to score very elaborately.
Yeah.
Some people really like to coddle their starter and play with different starters. Some people like to explore different grains. You'd
Yeah.
used a lot of inclusions in your recipes, and that's really a huge platform for doing things.
I would agree with that, like the grains part too, because I think that there's going to be more of a movement toward using more whole grains, whole wheat, ancient grains, all of that, like in your sourdough, because I think
Hmm.
that, I mean, it adds so much flavor, nutrition, all of those things, but it's learning to work with those grains. So if you already like are enjoying baking sourdough, like that would be the path that I would look at starting to add some of those into your breads.
Yeah, it really expands the flavor palette. And like it's really like I really like einkorn and
Hmm.
it's it adds a cool like golden color and sweet and but then it's also just easier to digest, even easier than just straight sourdough.
Yeah.
And so for people
Yeah.
who have any kind of issues with that stuff, einkorn's a great space to explore. This has been great. I've really enjoyed talking with you and thinking about your book and getting a chance to read it. And I'm excited for all the bakers that are going to learn to bake with this book and join the community and maybe start some cottage bakeries or at least are able to send their kid to school with like some homemade bread or wrapped around their peanut butter and jelly
It
sandwich.
it is true because
Yeah.
my 9-year-old who brings his sourdough bread in his school lunch, and the kids at school are like, "What is that? It's called sourdough? Like what? Why are you?" And he's like, "No, it's really good, guys." Like,
Yeah. You're- so you're making your kid the most popular kid in school. That's another secret power of sourdough
oh,
baking.
right.
So thank you so much for spending some time chatting. And if people want to learn more about you or your classes or any of that kind of stuff, how do people find out more?
Yeah, so I would just say go to my website, amybakesbread.com. You're going to find lots of sourdough information there. You can find more information about the cookbook. You can find about online classes and lots of I try to publish a new recipe at least once a week there. So you get lots of, new fresh content there as well too. And then I would say too, Instagram, I'm Amy Bakes Bread. You can find me there. I'm on almost all the platforms under that
Yeah.
same name. So
And very active. It produces a lot of content.
yes,
So if
yes,
you're hungry for some fresh content, Amy
yes.
is a destination. And if you're interested to learn more about Sour House, you can visit us at sourhouse.co or follow us on the social channels at Life at Sour House. And just thanks everybody for tuning in, listen to this chat. I hope you go pick up Amy's book when it comes out. It's The Beginner's Guide to Sourdough, Best Kept Secret for Successful Bread Every Time for Page Street Publishing. Amy, thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric. It's been so much fun.